This video I'm going to show you how to use the RAW processor. Now the RAW processor is kind of a separate application that both Adobe Bridge and Photoshop access. The same engine is used for Lightroom, but the interface is slightly different. But I'm just going to show you the Adobe Camera Raw interface. This should translate over to Lightroom pretty simple if you wanted to follow that. So I've selected a couple of images here. I'm just going to narrow those down. So these are the three images that I'm going to process. So we can select a few of these, and when we click this right here, this little Open in Camera Raw option, or we can open up the Camera Raw converter. And so this option comes up, and as you can see, it displays a histogram of the capture. We have options of altering the color balance. So depending on what kinds of options you want there. We can also dial in a custom color balance if you wanted to. Either type it in, or we can also do a sample. So this white balance tool, this eyedropper, if we click this, and you can see, well, what should be white here, you can kind of click on this and see. Sometimes some things are a little more accurate than others, but you can kind of decide what works. I usually use that if I'm in studio and actually target a color card target or something that's totally neutral. So, but as this one, I'm just going to leave it as shot. So that's the first thing that I like to do, is get a neutral color balance, and then from there I can decide, well, let's warm this up or cool it down depending on what you want to do. So there's that. And then we have some other options here in terms of adjusting exposure. So you can see that you have a lot of flexibility of maintaining some extra data. If you look at this completely now, this sky is kind of blown out, but when you look at it, there's actually data there. So we can adjust that. We can adjust the contrast. So depending on what kind of look we want there, I may want a little more contrast on this. Highlights will just target the highlight tones. You can see I'm getting a little bit more detail that way by pulling the highlights back. Whites, kind of the same thing. The blacks and shadows, we can darken things, and then the shadows will either darken or lighten. So usually those are a few of those things that I adjust just to see. We may want to bring the exposure down slightly, bring the shadows up, which brighten these tones here. Maybe our whites and our highlights need to be a little bit brighter, as you can see there. So those adjustments are where it starts. We also have a clarity option, and this is kind of a mid-tone contrast. You can see that it creates a little bit more sharpness in some areas, but I use this a little sparingly, especially on portraits. It'll make skin look really, really bad, so be careful on adding that. But this gives it a little more snap. Then we can control the vibrance and saturation. So the saturation is going to go overall. Vibrance is just going to kind of, notice it kind of beefs up the blue and the red on this. A lot of times I'll add a little vibrance and actually pull the saturation down, depending on what kind of look I'm going for. So those are the basics in terms of developing an image in Camera Raw. You can see that, let's say we go to this other image. This image clearly is a little bit underexposed, so I may want to overexpose it a little bit more. Maybe bring up some shadow detail. You can see that. Maybe it needs a little more clarity. You can see in this case clarity is good because it's bringing up a little more contrast, a little more gritty in that. So depending on your image style, what you're kind of looking for, you can alter that. So we have all those options. We have additional options as well of dealing with curves. So we can adjust the curve. So this is parametric option or point. This will function a lot more like in Photoshop if you wanted to apply a particular curve to it. So there's those options. We also have additional sharpening options. We have options here of converting things to grayscale. So we could immediately go to black and white. It also gives us the ability to control the luminance, so in saturation and hue of particular colors. So for example, if I want to darken all the blues, notice that kind of gives me a tonal adjustment in a way, but it darkens all the blues. We could do that also in black and white. If you grab a particular tone, you can see what's happening there. So some images are going to have more tones than others. So we have that option. You have effects where we could dehaze or add more grain. We can also add a vignette after we crop if you want. We also have cropping options here. So if you actually wanted to crop a certain way, we can use that too. So Camera Raw really gives you a lot of options in terms of development. We can also take this development and apply it to another image. So you can see that these are very similar. So let's say I want to apply this black and white to this one. I can just hit Shift, which will select these two images. And you can go back here to the basic development, and if I go to previous conversion, we'll go back to your original. You can always go back to your previous conversion. You see that? So that's the other great thing about this, is that you can use this as a way to process a file, but you always can go back to your original. So if I hit done. So basically what happens now is you'll notice that there are these little icons here that tell us that this image has got some settings that basically describe how Camera Raw is going to process it. So in Bridge, if I were to say I want to apply these settings to this one, I can click on that. And if I control click or right click under Develop Settings, I can go to Previous Conversion, and it will apply those settings to that one. So that's a way you can also kind of batch process an image. So you can spend some time developing just one and then apply those settings to that one. So you can see, well, let's see what these look like. So it's really kind of a nice option. If that makes sense. So Camera Raw gives you a lot of choices, and then from there, so once this is open, you open that in Camera Raw, and you can say Open Image. Then it goes into Photoshop. So it's one more step in terms of development, but from here on, we can now then do anything we want with it in Photoshop. But it just gives you a whole bunch of control before you even take it into Photoshop. So that's Camera Raw.